So we're going to go to section 1.5 now. We continue with this toy example, but I change a bit in the story again. Now I assume again that you are the street vendor. That means it's normative again. You want to take best decisions, of course. And let's assume that it's very important for you to get the right decision. So important that you are willing to hire an expensive advisor to give you advice on what decision to take. Probably street vendor with stakes on a few hundred euro. That's not a very realistic assumption, but you can imagine in finance decisions that often have the structure like in our toy example. And in many decisions, this is a good thing to do. So let us still continue with the example. Assume you got an expensive advisor giving you advice. So here comes the advice that he gives you. He says, what you should do is maximize expected value. That is my advice. So it means apparently you have to choose probabilities, etc. And the first question coming to mind is, well, how should you choose the probabilities? So you ask. And he says, choose them as good as possible. So that's the advice that this expensive guy gave you. There are already some problems in it, like how should you choose probabilities, that you should choose them as well as good as possible. Yeah, that's quite obvious. But maybe if he says you have to use that formula, that expected value formula, you have to get the probabilities. That is in itself an advice. Now my question is, are you convinced of this advice? Do you think it's a good advice, or can you specify reasons to doubt about it? Now you can pause the video and think a bit about if you can think of argument for or against, to what extent you are convinced. So make up your mind a little bit at this stage, the pros and the cons, and then listen again. Okay, so now I assume you made up your mind, you're listening again, and then I think at this stage like this, of course it's already, he doesn't say how to choose probabilities, but also the very fact that you should maximize expected value is not very clear convincing. Why would it be? One reason, it's ad hoc, He did not give any justification. Why would that formula be good? Why shouldn't we use another formula, some other theory? And this thing, no advice on how to choose the probabilities. Also, if you look a little bit, I already said ad hoc, but in the expected value formula, you are multiplying probabilities by money amounts. You are adding those products. Why wouldn't you do any other mathematical operation? So it's quite ad hoc at this stage, and you're not very convinced. I still want to encourage you that often people put forward an argument to justify expected value, which is in fact a quite good argument. I'll give you 1 more minute to think about, so you can pause the video. Can't you think of some very good argument? Then we resume. Okay, I think, I don't know, maybe you didn't guess what I had in mind, but what I have in mind of in advance, the law of large numbers. Law of large numbers you may remember from probability statistic courses. That means if you often repeat more or less independently some random process, then in the long run, let's say it always has some real valued outcome like money, then in the long run, on average, it will be the expected value that comes out. More and more the average of the process comes close to the expected value. That means if you must choose between two long repetitions of random processes, then in the long run, the one with a higher expected value will just give you more money. So in that sense, it makes quite some sense to maximize expected value. So this is often proposed as an argument to support expected value, and it is quite a good argument. But in our case, we can still think of limitations, shortcomings. One weak point is that it concerns repeated decisions, and you will remember that we assume in the street vendor example, it's only one time, one day, it's not repeated. Well, maybe you can embed it in other similar decision or something, but still it's a bit a difficult point. We don't have repeated but single decision here. And a bit more fundamental maybe, but often the total money that you gain over a process is not really the most relevant criterion. For instance, if you get a job by the first 2 years of your life, you get nothing, so you die from starvation. And after you get billions of euros, no use for you because you died already from, so there's some total other things and some total are often relevant. That's another weak point in this reasoning, especially with long and repeated decisions. You need stable income. So it's a law of life. There is a point there, and repeated decision that there are many situations which is good, but maybe in single there is also, but it's not very convincing. We really, to really accept expected value as a rational theory, I actually think so. And the main purpose today is to convince you of it. Anyway, to really accept that, we really need better arguments. So let us say that your advisor is confronted with criticism and he apologizes. He says, okay, I'm sorry I gave not very good advice. Please give me a second chance. Give me one more chance to give you advice. You say, okay, one more chance, but now must be good. And now come his recommendations. First, he says, I think your preferences, your decision should satisfy monotonicity. I will only say a word what monotonicity means. It means the more money, the better, so to say. If you can choose between two options, one option always gives at least as much and sometimes really more, then you prefer that option. We saw an example of it in the first table of the street vendor. There was an option not taking no merchandise with you, an option taking both merchandises with you. Then the both option, it would always give at least as much as none, sometimes really more in the case of some rain. So monotonicity says you should always prefer taking both merchandises, both ice cream and hot dogs, rather than take nothing. So that's a quite obvious condition. And this advice, at least now, you are willing to buy this advice. This is a good advice. Bit of a problem is that it is trivial advice. You don't need an expensive advisor to tell you this, but at least you agree with it. So it's not a bad start. The second advice that your advisor consultant gives you is transitivity. You should satisfy transitivity. I only say a word you will remember from micro courses or so. If X is preferred to Y, or Y is preferred to Z, then X should prefer to Z. That's transitivity. And again, you're willing to buy that advice. You think it makes sense, I accept it. So again, it's a good advice, you agree with it, but again, the problem is it's trivial. You don't need an expensive advisor to tell you that. Now comes the third recommendation, and that's a substantive one. That's the one that has real content that we will discuss quite a bit. It's additivity. Your advisor tells you your choices should satisfy additivity. Now I define it. Additivity says if you prefer some option X to an option Y, then if you add a third side option Z, your preference should not change from that. So adding side payments, so to say, should not change your preferences. Improving an ingredient in the sum improves the sum. That's the additivity condition. Your consultant tells you this is also a good condition for you to satisfy. You should satisfy it. Now you have to think about it, and I'm inviting you to think about it already. Is this really convincing advice? Is this really always a good thing to do? Maybe it makes some first sight sense, but not very clear. You would like to see examples before you really buy into it. And that's what we're going to do to give you further idea what it means and what are the strong and weak points of it. I will give you examples of it, and we're going to discuss it quite a bit. That'll be the main topic of today. Is this a reasonable, rational condition? But that discussion will continue in another recording. I'm going to stop the recording now.